Dairy Operations webinar. We are in the midst of a prompt as far as the high path situation. So we felt that reviewing biosecurity was a good topic for this month's webinar. Our presenter today is Dr. Delaine Quaresma, and she will be assisted occasionally by Dr. Molly Lee. Both work with the Center for Food Security and Public Health at Iowa State University. Dr. Quaresma joined the center in January of 22. Prior to working at the center, she worked as a mixed animal veterinary in California and Iowa. She was raised on a third-generation dairy farm in the Central Valley of California, earned her Bachelor of Science degree at the University of California, and her DVM from University of California, Davis in 2018. And her master's at the same time in public health from the University of Iowa in 21. Her passion for animal health, education, and agriculture led her to our center here in Iowa. I'm delighted to have her here today. And as I always say, the podium is yours, Delaine.
Thank you, Fred, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Like Fred mentioned, I work at the Center for Food Security and Public Health. I've been there for about 2 years now. But in addition to my veterinary background, I did grow up on a good-sized dairy farm in California. So I'd like to sometimes think I have a lifetime of experience working with a nice, stubborn Portuguese farmer known as my father. So hopefully that experience can help or at least be relatable to some of you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll get started with a PowerPoint. There's a couple things I want to note though, and namely that the information that we have on a lot of things, but specifically HPAI and cattle and this outbreak is constantly changing. So when I think about biosecurity, a lot of times I like to generalize it in the sense that it can hopefully be applicable whatever the disease situation is. A number of the recommendations and things we'll go through today were developed as part of the Secure Milk Supply Program, and that was based off of a potential for foot and mouth disease if that were to occur, and how we would maybe respond and react to it to try and maintain the industry. And then with that, every farm is different. Again, so try and focus on generalizing so that you can take the concept and apply it to your situation. And I think we have a couple people that'll be able to help monitor the chat if you have questions throughout. Otherwise, happy to take questions at the end. I will do my best to answer. So again, overview, going to touch base a little bit on our current HPAI situation and as well as foot and mouth disease. Then we'll move into kind of those biosecurity principles and discuss some of the daily concepts that hopefully most farms are utilizing. And then some of the enhanced concepts for when diseases like HPAI, foot and mouth disease, or other emerging things may arise. And then lastly, focus on some resources and outreach materials so that hopefully to make things easier for everyone. There's a lot going on, and if we could all help each other out, I think that would be useful. So moving to disease spread, just some basic background. It occurs when an agent leaves its reservoir or host through a portal of exit. This is going to be through some route of transmission, and then there will be a portal of entry into the new host. This is influenced by a number of various factors for the likelihood of causing disease, including the pathogenicity, the infectious dose, the environment that it's in, the status of the reservoir host. So again, there's a lot of things that can influence these individual steps. And that's why biosecurity will be targeted at some of these things and preventing them. So if we move on to thinking about those routes of transmission, there's 5 routes: direct contact, which can be horizontal or vertical, inanimate objects, also known as fomites, ingestion, and aerosol and vectors. When we think about HPAI, in cattle specifically, we're kind of at a learning phase right now, which is making the biosecurity part somewhat difficult, in the sense of our targets to stop the infectious spread. So backing up a little bit, HPI is highly pathogenic to birds. So that's going to be meaning it's going to likely cause mortality and death. In cattle, it's much more of a high morbidity. We get decreased milk production, decreased feed intake, diarrhea and fever. Humans are showing mild-like flu illness, and other animals that have been noted in the current investigations being cats with respiratory or neurological signs, sometimes death. And something else to note is that animals may not show obvious signs of disease. This also impacts some of the things we think about in terms of animal movement that we'll go over later. So what I was getting at for our current outbreak in dairy cattle is we are still learning how it truly is spread. The current thought is that the initial transmission was from wild bird to cow, but that since then it's been mostly cow-to-cow transmission through movement. Again, we are still confirming that. There are a number of reports and investigations going on that help make these assessments. But working on this will really help people implement practices that will help prevent disease spread. Other things that we know regarding the transmission, again, that research is needed to fully understand the route of exposure, but they've been detecting extremely high levels of viral particles in the milk, and that it seems that close contact and closed environments have been implicated a lot in these investigations, in addition to what I mentioned about as far as moving cattle, and then local spread when we have dairies and poultry operations that might be in close proximity. So some information from these investigations looked at some common themes of what may have been happening on these farms during these outbreaks or just prior to these outbreaks that may have led to disease spread. And looking at this data, again, this data is from, we're looking at May, June, and things are constantly changing, but a number of these components deal with movement of animals and or people between farms, again, highlighting a potential route of transmission. And this is also with some information looking at the majority of farms had regular visitors who had contact with cattle, which are necessary parts to having a working farm, having a veterinarian, having nutritionists, having milk trucks come around, a breeder, renders. And in collecting this information, it's noted that frequent visitors with access to animals is recognized as a risk for disease transmission. Again, some of this may seem obvious, but we're truly trying to confirm what route of transmission so that we can properly target that with biosecurity concepts to prevent disease transmission. And then some of the Michigan Epi investigation info also noted movement between cattle and herds. There were shared vehicles and equipment of visitors, and some of the herds had shared workers. So a worker working at a dairy, working at another dairy, going between the farms, or going between a dairy farm and a poultry farm. And then again, noting close proximity between wildlife and the dairy cattle. A little bit on foot and mouth disease. Like I said, the secure milk supply plans were originally built based off the concept of foot and mouth coming and what we might do to address that. So foot and mouth disease, it's susceptible species would be our cloven-hooved animals. It causes fever, vesicular lesions, epithelial erosions, a drop in milk production, lameness, and salivation. About this disease as well, there's a high morbidity and some mortality, more so in the younger animals. But it's similarly when we're thinking about HPAI, the morbidity aspect, these things affecting the animals have these negative consequences down the line. Again, I think the dairy industry, it relies on being able to produce milk. So anything that affects the ability to produce milk affects the farmers, affects the people who work on farms, and all the way down to the consumer in the stores. Foot and mouth disease transmission, direct contact, fomites, and aerosol. Again, pigs can be amplifying hosts and they can excrete large amounts. And then the disease can spread via those aerosol particles. If it gets on inanimate objects such as clothing or footwear, and that is worn to another farm. And then also as far as feeding contaminated products. This is highlighting some of those routes of disease transmission, mostly being that the most important route would be direct animal contact. And I again highlight this because this is an example disease where we know how it's spreading, as opposed to HPAI, where we're still learning and confirming the route of disease transmission, which is again important when we start thinking about biosecurity. Because when we're looking at biosecurity, two main concepts with it. We want to prevent disease introduction to a farm, but we also want to prevent disease spread outside of that farm. So these concepts can also be broadly thought as bioexclusion and biocontainment. And as we go through this, again, I'll be highlighting some of the ideas for the route of disease transmission. But knowing that and knowing no more information about that helps with these practices for biosecurity. It's always important to remember why we're doing something. Again, from personal experience, even though I went to veterinary school and I have lots of ideas, my father still wants to know why I would be doing them, and that's justified. He has just, I mean, he has years of experience operating a dairy farm. But it is truly important to communicate that to your clients and to the people that you're working with. why am I doing this? Is it just because, someone said this? Why does it matter? That just sounds good. It looks good. But truly, there are reasons why we're doing these things that can cause a lot of time and financial stress on the farmers. And so communicating the public health risk is important. Some of these things can, not just HPAI, not just foot and mouth, but other diseases can be transferred between the animals and humans. So there's a risk there. And then there are direct and indirect financial costs when we have outbreaks in these diseases. So not just the animal lives lost, but also their ability to produce. And that, like I had mentioned previously before, has some trickle-down effects. Fewer animals to haul, fewer products, supply and demand, and that can cause higher prices in the grocery stores, and on and on. So keeping that in mind, we start thinking about breaking down biosecurity into three main principles. That would be separation, movement, control, and sanitation. So separation means keeping potentially infected animals and materials from unaffected animals. It applies in a number of ways, and it's very effective. If you think about it, if a pathogen is not present on a farm, then it can't infect the animals on a farm. And thinking about movement control, we're minimizing, again, movement, which could create potential exposures between animals. Any of that can inadvertently spread disease. And then sanitation refers to our manure handling, carcass disposal, and cleaning and disinfection. A disease agent might be present, but if we can properly clean and disinfect it before an animal comes around, that might be able to prevent, again, disease spread. So moving on to daily and enhanced biosecurity. I want to again highlight that every farm is different. We have some ideal goals, and working with your clients is, you know them best. So really take advantage of that understanding and that relationship to work with them to implement what is feasible for them. So ideally, we're going to have a biosecurity manager and a written plan. So the biosecurity manager should be familiar with the facility. It shouldn't be me 5 states away who's never been on the facility, because I don't know how it operates. And that person should develop the plan with the veterinarian, and they communicate the biosecurity measures, and then they monitor to ensure compliance. They'll build a site-specific biosecurity plan, and it is important that includes a premise map, which I'll be going into a little bit further detail in the next few slides. And then this person, again, it's important that they communicate this to the other employees. They make it accessible, and they review it so that it's up to date in case things need to change. So these site-specific plans need to explain how the site is going to implement the biosecurity measures listed in a checklist. And I'm referring to some things that I will also, again, highlight in the resources, because this can be a lot of information to be like, say, hey, do this. So again, people and groups have worked to kind of create templates and these checklists to make life easier for people who are already very, very busy. So in referencing this listed checklist, I'll again highlight it later. But again, should include the map with several items which need to be included in terms of like where people are parked, and potential perimeter buffer areas and line of separation. There would be kind of 3 responses to how thoroughly implemented these items are. So if the biosecurity manager is reviewing the plan, the item might be in place, it might be in progress, so some of the components are addressed but not all, or not implemented, and then or they're not in place at all, and more needs to be done to target that item. Their role would also be to maintain this training. It is best and ideal if people have an awareness of 1, where resources are, 2, what might need to be done in the event of an outbreak or change. Again, I say ideal, that makes responses more efficient and effective. That was demonstrated between some of the earlier outbreaks of HPI and poultry in the state of Iowa in the 2000s versus some of the more recent ones, and their ability to address the outbreaks so that they have to minimize the effects of a potential outbreak. I think our dairy industry is learning that now with the current outbreak of HPAI. And again, that's kind of why we're highlighting some of this information, and hopefully you can take it back and implement it with your clients. Moving forward to farm access and biosecurity. It would be nice if, on a daily existence for biosecurity, if there's gates and barriers and signage that limits personnel. So not anyone's just coming onto a farm, bringing anything onto a farm. If you think about things like the people working in maternity probably aren't working out in the heifer areas or the breeding areas, trying to keep some of those personnel within the farm from cross-contaminating within the farm, if that makes sense. But when we start thinking about enhanced biosecurity, we start adding in the concept of a line of separation or a perimeter buffer area. And these are focused on minimizing contamination near the animals and separating them, the off-farm from the on-farm movements of animals, people, and vehicles. So what that would look like, something like this, where this is a potential farm. And what we're looking at is a buffer area, would be this teal kind of box. And that is trying to keep people from off farm, not letting them enter these areas. And then we have these additional line of separation, which would be the red that's around each building. And that even restricts further movement between, even when you're on farm, between different areas. So this is a graphic, and that's in an ideal situation. But if we look at an example of a real farm, just an overhead, things aren't as clear and cut and organized. And again, every farm is different. So in looking here, this facility, the red line would be the line of separation, meaning we shouldn't be having any off-farm crossover of the red. Then we look at, this is a dairy example, we would keep the milk truck, it would be this green, that would be their route. Again, because the milk truck might be going to other farms, we want to minimize any potential crossover of if any disease agents were on the vehicle getting closer to the animals, and again, being a potential route of disease spread. And then we'll have things like controlled access points. And that's where we're looking at these yellow lines. Obviously, employees need to get onto the farm to work. So these controlled access points and where the employees might go, there would be different measures, which we'll get into, of what they would then do to then cross over into the farm area. And with that, we're looking at these cleaning and disinfection stations for vehicles. And that is if the vehicle has to cross over into the farm, doing our best to remove any potential disease agents. So another example here, and this is showing that only the milk line zoomed in here would need to cross the line of separation. So this would be one way to prevent vehicles from getting unnecessarily far onto a premise. So in determining the line of separation or potential buffer area, there's a number of things we could kind of keep in mind. And that's going to be important to start thinking about the inputs and outputs that regularly occur on an operation, usually in the 30-day period. If I go back, I mean, it's a nice idea. We can just put a line around everything and say nobody gets in, but that's obviously not realistic. Milk products need to come out. Animals might get sick. The veterinarian might need to come in. Things like that. So in considering common movements and where they might need to be, that's where we should think about our facilities and maybe where to put the line of separation or the perimeter buffer area, and establish our cleaning and disinfection areas accordingly. Because if we end up with a bunch of them, that's also going to be costly in terms of time and water and disinfectant products. So there can be potential pros and cons of where you put these things. And other considerations might be of where you might be able to move your animals up if they need to leave the farm, rather than bringing the vehicles back. Specifically for high path situation right now, an enhanced measure would be hosing down and sanitizing the contact surfaces in the milk house after collection if the milk hauler enters after being on other farms, which is likely. I referenced the inputs and outputs and checklists. At the end of the biosecurity manuals, there's going to be an appendix that can help producers and veterinarians work through these various inputs and outputs and can help with some contingency planning. Again, I'll highlight these resources at the end and share them so that they're hopefully easily accessible to you. I mentioned cleaning the milk room facilities. For some other enhanced concepts, we need to really think about guidance movement of the animals, peoples, and vehicles, and then where these cleaning and disinfection stations might happen. Make sure people know where they are, how the runoff is managed, and have some contingency plans. So for the vehicles and equipment, they're necessary for the business and continuity of operations, but we should avoid and minimize sharing if possible. If it does have to happen, again, having these stations where we can clean the tires and the wheel wells, or as I was previously highlighting in some of the graphics, ways for these vehicles to stay out of the line of separation or the perimeter buffer area. And an example of that is moving the livestock closer to the ones that'll be leaving, rather than having the vehicles drive further back into the farm. Other things to consider would be restricting off-farm vehicle traffic from shared paths with on-farm vehicle traffic. Again, ideally as best we can. Every farm is different in how they're set up. There may be some crossover, and that might be where you consider putting the line of separation is after that crossover, things like that. And then for cleaning and disinfecting, it's important to dry clean, but essentially remove the organic material, wash and rinse it and dry, and then apply the disinfectant. If there's a lot of feces or other dirt still on an object or an item, the disinfectant is not going to be as effective. It's also very important to read the product label and understand the contact time, and knowing which things are going to be the hardest to disinfect versus the easiest. In considering high path, we have some EPA registered products that have been pulled together. This slide is courtesy of Danelle Beckett-Whittle with Preventalytics. She kindly created that QR code, which makes it easier to reach. It's the same as the URL on the screen. But again, these are the EPA's registered antimicrobial products, again, effective against avian influenza. And then some other disinfectants to mention that would need to be, again, follow the label directions to be effective, but against FMD and flu are listed on the slide. Then we move forward into thinking about people. So it would be ideal if these farms already had some daily biosecurity protocols, such as foot baths. I had mentioned, probably in a roundabout way, the caretaker roles when I was suggesting it would be ideal to have employees assigned to the maternity area be separate from the employees assigned to the feeding area or even the milking area, so that they're not, if there's something in one area, they're not bringing it to another. Having dedicated clothing and shoes or shoe covers, regular hand washing. And when we think about enhanced biosecurity, we start to think about more of logging all these movements, which can be helpful in determining if there was a breakdown somewhere. Then we also think about if these workers or personnel had been to another farm, trying to create some time separation before they enter the current farm. It should be essential personnel only in this situation. We can try and plan for deliveries, but the visitors that are coming onto the farm, it should be absolutely necessary. Now would not be the time to be doing just showing off where things are, having the family came to visit from across the country and showing them everything. As noted, they should show up showered, wearing clean clothing, footwear. If you think about veterinarians, they should be washing their boots and probably changing coveralls between visiting farms, depending on the type of farm they're visiting, the situation, only visiting one farm in a day. When we think about some of the more enhanced protocols, this graphic demonstrates where a person would enter, leave their street clothes, so to speak, cross over into farm clothes so that the things from the outside of the farm don't enter the farm. So having dedicated areas and equipment for people. Thinking about our current situation, influenza is zoonotic. And so to help prevent transmission to humans, we're encouraging employees and people to wear eye and nose protection. When milking cattle, milk it can get anywhere or anything, even cleaning it, it can splash up in your face. Making sure they wash hands after handling cows or real milk, and not consuming any raw milk products. As mentioned previously, there is extremely high load of viral particles in raw milk. Pasteurization has been shown to kill the virus, and so pasteurized milk products are safe to consume. But the raw milk products are not, they don't undergo that process, so they are not. Specific guidance from CDC and NIOSH regarding H5N1 are present here and can be found on their site. But again, considering things like wearing eye, nose, and mouth protection, gloves, boots, and having separate attire for on-farm and off-farm activities so that they don't cross-contaminate. Moving on to animal movement and health, daily measures would include record keeping. I think it's generally safe to say that most farms have an idea, are keeping some sort of log regarding their animals. And when they're pregnant, when they calved, who did what, animal events, breeding, etc. And having a health protocol that's been established and collaborated with their veterinarian. When we think about enhanced biosecurity for animal movement and animal health, we start thinking about pre-movement isolation periods. That would mean if you're going to have animals moving out, you shouldn't have animals moving in, as they could spread disease to those animals moving out, and then the animals moving out could then spread the disease further on. You should have a plan for interrupted animal movement and maintaining directional flow, and then you're not going to want outgoing animals. They may not be returning. So this concept is reflected in some of the mandates that have been sent out nationwide and statewide, in terms of there's different regulations for animals that are going to slaughter versus animals that are going to exposition, for example. So yeah, as I mentioned, where we're at right now, on the left is our federal order, and on the right is the current Iowa order regarding the animal movement and testing. It can change and it does change. So making sure these or any updates are referenced before moving animals is important, federally, and checking with your state as well. And then considering isolating newly introduced lactating animals for at least 30 days and milking them separately or last, again, to prevent spread of disease. For animal product, we should be thinking about these things and the potential that they could spread disease. Right now, semen and embryos have not been linked to the spread of HPAI to date. We don't have as much information on that. So it's something to consider. We should know where these things are coming from, and they should come from sources with documented biosecurity practices. If we're thinking about colostrum, we would want that product to be pasteurized or coming from your own herd. A milk disposal plan should exist in the case that raw milk can't leave the farm. Some of these things where we're at currently, there is some financial assistance regarding some of these processes that I'll highlight towards the end. When we think about carcass disposal, in general, we don't want to be attracting outside things onto the farm. So whatever we can do to prevent wildlife, rodents, and scavengers, like covering compost piles and properly disposing of carcasses, is important. In thinking about in an outbreak situation and needing more enhanced biosecurity, we got to think about the vehicles that may be transporting the carcasses and what farms they're coming from. If it's possible to clean and disinfect the equipment that was used to move the animals. And then there should be a plan in case of a large number of die-offs. Again, veterinarians and authorities working together can really help farmers plan for this. And it may depend on the disease situation, what type of disposal is recommended or possible. We think about manure management. It's important to keep that separate from feeding products for animals. It should be taken care of in a way to prevent exposure of various animals to disease agents, and it should follow local regulations. In the case of an outbreak and where we might have more enhanced biosecurity, there might be additional regulations that have to be followed. And if we're not able to take it off site, there should be a plan for how to process or how to manage manure in that case. Thinking about rodents, wildlife, and other animals, again, I mentioned trying to prevent not attracting outside animals. So what we can do is keep areas clean, make it more difficult for certain animals to get in, and not allowing animals to crow between farms. And in our current situation, thinking about some of the small animals and focusing on them as they might be early indicators. And then some of these species might be reservoirs, so they might shed the virus. So again, trying to keep them away. I had mentioned earlier that data had showed that the initial introduction of H5N1 to the dairy cattle in Texas was thought to be through a single spillover event from birds to cows. And then the subsequent movement has been from cows to cows. So there's not evidence that they continue to do it, but it is still possible. And so managing these other wildlife that could get onto the farm is very important. And then we think about feed and water of our animals, keeping things in mind on a daily basis of not using manure management equipment to then handle our feed and having proper disposal methods, having proper storage methods, and then an enhanced standpoint, thinking again about those delivery vehicles. Where are they coming from? Do they need to cross the line of separation? Do we have ways to keep the feed in buildings or closed bins so that wildlife can't get into it? Those kinds of considerations. So once someone goes through all of that and helps create the plan, what do we do with it? How do we implement it? And that will depend on the situation. So in the absence of the disease, you might not apply everything, or it might not be feasible for the farmer to have all of those. However, if the disease gets diagnosed, such as FMD, or in a situation that we currently have, H5N1, the farmer might need to prepare to implement all of the items, or start implementing more of the items. And then if we think of a situation where the farm is in a control area, then officials and regulatory authorities might require them. So there's kind of this level of what gets implemented and how and when and why. But thinking about the different situations will help guide that. So moving on to the resources and outreach materials that I've been mentioning. Dr. Bigot Whittle has been working on updating some of the recommendations with the National Milk Federation and in collaboration with AVP. So they had some recommendations that they released April 1st. And then based on what's been learned since that date about the spread and exposure and transmission, the resources have been updated and they'll be available really soon and posted to those websites. Again, I've mentioned it a number of times, information is constantly being gathered, and thus for recommendations are being updated and changed. But referring back to resources like this will give you the most up-to-date information. I also mentioned the Secure Milk Supply program. They have a number of free materials that help with planning biosecurity, again, plans and implementing the practices, templates that you can use to go to help working with clients on their farm. And it's not just for milk. There is a secure pork supply, a secure beef supply. There's one for poultry. But again, these plans are built for the continuity of business. And we want to help protect the herds and the farmers and their business during an outbreak. Farms can talk with their state department ag about participating in the plan. And then they can also visit these sites to learn more and find some of those resources I described, such as these biosecurity checklists, and as well as information manuals for these different species. They also have trainings which are useful that you can show your clients, or your clients and or their biosecurity manager can show other employees, so they have a better idea of what's being implemented. They're pretty short. I think most of the modules are under 5 minutes, and they can be watched individually or in a group setting. And with that, it mentioned again, templates. No need to reinvent the wheel. So if they're there and ready to be used. If you are in Iowa, currently the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship is working on their Iowa Foreign Animals Disease Defense Certification Program. So they had some in-person events for training, but they also have some virtual modules as well that can assist with refreshing, just getting up to date and reminding ourselves of some of these biosecurity practices and what we can do and how to best be prepared in the event of a foreign animal disease outbreak. In addition, if you're in Iowa, you might be able to utilize the biosecurity trailer. Dr. Lee recently took this to an event, and it's a way to demonstrate to animal health individuals, veterinarians, farmers, other personnel, some of these concepts and kind of role play or live action, hands-on, see them in rather than just looking at trainings online. Lastly, I want to highlight the USDA financial support. There are a couple different routes. It's best to refer to the USDA's website to get the most up-to-date information, but they do have financial assistance for helping set up these biosecurity plans. And for infected herds, there's support for PPE for personnel. And then there's some other loan options, as well as some financial support for milk testing and veterinary costs associated with the HPAI outbreak. I'd like to acknowledge, like I said, USDA, CDC, the National Milk Producers Federation, and Preventalytics for the number of the great resources that were utilized today. And here are a few links. Pending where we go with the rest of our time, we can visit a few of these sites. But again, thank you for your time. Hopefully there was something of use for you and the farmers or industry personnel that you interact with. And I will do my best to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Delaine. We appreciate that. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, maybe pick your top 2 go-to resources and just open them up, and so we know what to look for when we use those.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. Let me get out of the presentation. I had a few up actually. So hopefully you can see these web pages. So this is the National Milk Producers Federation webpage that I had mentioned. That this is where you would reference the about to be, soon to be released documents that I from Dr. Danelle Beckett-Whittle and these organizations. But they have some HPAI specific recommendations regarding biosecurity on here, and they will be updated. The Center for Food Security and Public Health, we have a number of free resources on our website. It's just CFSPH biosecurity. It should lead you here. But everything from checklists to forms, and some of them have been adapted by species. So not just dairy, but potentially for other clients. I referenced the Secure Milk Supply program quite a bit to help with designing potential protocols. If you are trying to think, this would be specific to Iowa, but USDA is going to have um, the most up-to-date information nationwide. And they also have resources regarding a number of the things I highlight today regarding financial support or biosecurity practices, etc.
Very good. Thank you very much. We've got a question from Jim asking you to do a little speculation here. Will this disease become endemic in the dairy herds and dairy industry?
Well, speculation's always a risky thing. I wish I had a magic 8 ball, not only for this current outbreak, but it would be helpful, I would say, in my daily life. That aside, I don't think there's enough information out there to answer that. And it's things like that, the unknowns of what's going to happen. Take things like COVID and the response, the current HPAI response that we're in, the idea that foot and mouth could come to the US. And there are just so many questions and so many unknowns that I like the approach of what I kind of was hinting at the beginning, the generalizing, because I don't know and don't have control over what may come. I look at what I could do, kind of thinking about those routes is a best practice scenario, especially when I don't have all the information.
Because this disease is fairly new in dairy, when we first had COVID, they said, well, once you got it, you're immune, you won't get it again. And several of us are proving that that's not the case. How about with high path? Are we going to see cows in herds reoccurring?
Again, I don't know if there's a direct answer for that. We're still, I mean, I know it's been going on for a couple months, but we're still early in our epi investigations. The other thing to kind of consider there is influenza is a special type of virus. And that will get into a deeper level of what I'm probably able to speak on. Maybe when I was a vet student, I could give you all the H's and the N's but my point is the flu virus is ever changing. If you think about the flu vaccines in humans, you get different ones every year. So in that sense, it is possible, or it's possible that it'll be something similar but slightly different. I think, again, there's just too many unknowns to say, oh, yes, this will happen, or oh, no, that definitely won't happen. I think, again, the best direction forward is to think about how can I prevent this from happening as best as possible.
Okay, very good. We have a question about any specific recommendations for disinfectants for consultants to use to clean boots and equipment between farm visits.
I would follow the recommendations that were on the slide, which it is possible, someone had asked if to get the slides in PDF format. So that would probably be a great way to be able to reference those specific products. I can share that slide again that had the QR code.
Just to help people as you're putting the slide up, that the PDF will be available in the archived version, as well as several of the other resources that you have suggested or that Iowa State Dairy Team has on their website.
Fred, I did put the PDF into the chat.
Very good.
Thank
you,
people
Jen.
there to download if they want.
And I just popped that EPA link in the chat as well for the registered disinfectants.
Thank you both.
As we're going through, we have another question. Does this virus affect milk fat quality and production of the herd?
So it's been shown to definitely affect the daily production. So the clinical signs in dairy cattle that they initially noted were a drop in production, and then some changes in the consistency of the milk, quite frequently being referenced as a colostrum-like thickness. And then the animals also decrease in rumination and eating. So it's been shown, yes, to affect the milk production and quality.
We get a question when you use the term separation. Is that nose to nose separation, or is there some distance that's being recommended between groups?
So it's definitely a catch-all term. Biosecurity and disease prevention are one of those things where we could go lots of different directions with this. And so a lot of times things get summarized. So separation can refer the nose to nose. It can also refer to farther. And these are based on the disease route of transmission. So if something is transmitted by direct contact, the degree of separation likely wouldn't need to be as great as a disease that is transmitted via aerosols and that can travel on the wind. For recommendations regarding HPAI, I don't have a specific distance off the top of my head. But farms to do their best if they have some new animals coming in, keeping them in a separate pen and area from the animals that already exist on the farm. Definitely not able to have direct contact. Again, I don't know I don't have a specific distance off the top of my head, but considering things like that. Hopefully that makes sense, but please ask a follow-up question.
Okay. You mentioned some viruses can be aerosolized. We have not seen that in high path at this point, or have we? Either in poultry or dairy?
They're saying it is a probable but unknown. They have not confirmed that as a route of transmission for dairy. I believe that is a potential on the poultry side, but I'd probably stick to my cloven-hooved animals.
Okay. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but in the case of high path affected herd, which medicine protocol is recommended, or maybe not even a medicine, but what is the protocol as far as hydration and such?
Specifically, that would be determined with the veterinarian serving the farm. There's not a general recommendation that I know of from our standpoint. I think a lot of it is going to be symptomatic and supportive care, as well as preventing disease spread within the farm. So if there's an affected herd, separating the affected animals from unaffected animals is definitely going to be an important step of preventing spread within the farm. And then trying to support those animals symptomatically, you're looking at maintaining hydration, whether that's orally or if some of them need IV fluids, monitoring fevers, things like that. But again, it would be specific to the farm and the veterinarian who services that farm.
We've been really concentrating on our lactating cows and functional dairies. What kind of protocols, because a lot of my producers grow heifers someplace else, what should we be looking at or encouraging with our heifer growers?
So that is a fantastic question and very important. Like you said, the focus has been on the lactating animals, and they seem to be the most affected clinically. But that does not mean that the heifers are not subclinical. So if you have a heifer facility, and it's separate from the milking facility, some of the things that we talked about in this presentation, like changing clothing, either having separate boots or making sure you clean and disinfect your boots before you visit one to the other. Things like that are extremely important. Thinking about which vehicles go back and forth between the two and limiting the traffic back and forth between the two. It also, the recommendations might change slightly if, say, the dairy premise is affected and has HPAI, and there's a separate, like an additional heifer facility. There would be considerations. Again, business has to go on, animals still need to be fed, but doing things like going to the unaffected one first, or having personnel that only go to the heifers and other personnel only go to the dairy. It becomes, again, I've mentioned the generalization, and it becomes kind of like a puzzle, finding what fits for your specific operation or your client's specific operation. There's no one size fits all, and it is definitely a do the best we can. We're all still learning. Hopefully
Very
that
good.
answers,
I
gives you
believe
some
it did.
direction. Yeah.
Jen or Jim, are you seeing any other questions or have questions you collected?
No.
Okay. I've just put in our list again. We asked folks who have attended this program to fill out our evaluation of the program. That helps us get better every time. And I've included the archived location there on the I-29 MUU website. We will have the PowerPoints as well as it in a PDF for folks. So at this point, any closing statements, Delaine?
Just thank you again. Thank you, Fred, for the opportunity to speak and share what I think are some important resources. And I wish I had the answers to everything, but hopefully the options and general approach are easily adaptable for those that need it. Yeah, just thank you.
Very good. Before we sign off, I'd like to remind folks that our next dairy webinar for I-29 will be held on August 22nd, as always, from 12 noon to 1, and it'll discuss the advances in colostrum management with Dr. Sandra Godden. So we look forward to seeing everybody in August. At this point, we will go ahead and close the program for this month.